The CSS background properties have a variety of uses for web development. Let's explore some of these. Create a new HTML file using your favorite HTML editor. I'm going to call mine bg.html and save it to the desktop. Add in the HTML base structure and put in the title of Background Power. First, get a large image to use as a background for the site. Search on Google for background images. Select the landscape option. Under Search Tools, there are many filters you can apply to the search. Under Usage Rights, select Labeled for Reuse so that you will only see images that may be reused without modification for commercial or non-commercial use. I like this image, partly because I feel it would be dramatic for a site without being too distracting. Right-click on the image you choose and select Save Image As. I am going to save this to the desktop with the file name of bglandscape.jpg. Back in the code, create an internal style sheet. Create a style for the body element and set the background image property to URL bglandscape.jpg. The single quotes are not necessary here, but would be if there were any spaces in the file name. Save and open the page in a browser. The image covers the body, but is actually much larger than the window, so we only see the top left of the image. You could open the image in a photo editing program and resize it, but your users will be using devices with different screen sizes. Instead, set the background size property to 100%. There are many options for how to use this property that you may look up online, but this should size the image to have the same width as the body. Save and refresh. This looks pretty good and the image resizes as the window resizes. However, when the screen is narrow, you see the image repeated. The same thing would happen on a wide screen if there was enough content on the page to create a vertical scroll bar. Add a main element and put in a paragraph of lorem ipsum. Create a style for the main element. Set the font size to 3em so it is 3 times the font size of the document. Set the padding to 10% on the top and bottom and 20% to the left and right. Save and refresh. Now the amount of content on the page requires more vertical space. Even on a wider screen, when you scroll down the page, you see the image repeated. Sometimes this is desirable, but what if you did not want this to happen? To avoid this tiling effect, set the background repeat property to no repeat. With this approach, it is typical to set the background color to match the image. For this picture, I'm going to set the background color to #CABFA9, a color I previously selected directly from the image in Photoshop. Now the image only appears once on the page, and the color of the background is consistent with the image. Notice when you scroll through the content of the page, the image moves with the content. Sometimes you might want to fix the image so it does not move with the content. In the CSS, set the background attachment property to fixed. When you save and refresh, the background is now fixed in one place as the content moves up and down. When using an image for a background, you should always make sure the text and any other content is easy to read. It is the content, after all, that you want the users to be focused on. One method is to use subtle backgrounds that contrast well with the font color and other elements of the page. Another option is to set background colors for the content containers. Set the background color of the main element to RGBA 255, 255, 255, and 0.7. So it is white and 70% opaque or 30% transparent. Also, change padding to margin so the background color is not applied to the space around the main element. Then add a padding of 2% to retain some spacing around the text within the div. Save and refresh. This gives more focus to the content and prevents the background image from interfering. Go back to the internet and search for seamless textures. I will just save this one to the desktop as seamless.jpg. In the code, change the URL of the background image property to seamless.jpg. Remove the background size so the image does not stretch to fill the page. Save and refresh. You can see the image appears at its actual size. In this case, we do want the image to repeat. Change the value of the background repeat property to repeat-x. When you save and refresh, you see the image now repeats horizontally but not vertically. Notice that you cannot tell where one image ends and another begins. This is what a seamless texture is. The image is created so that the left side perfectly matches the right side. When the image is repeated, no line or seam is visible. Change the value of the background repeat property to repeat-y. When you save and refresh, you see the image now repeats vertically but not horizontally. To make the image repeat horizontally and vertically, you could change the value of the background repeat property to repeat. However, this is the default value, so you could just as easily remove the property altogether. Save and refresh. If you look closely, you can see a seam. The image is not completely seamless after all. Back to the code. There is a shortcut that allows you to set many of the properties related to the background with one line of CSS. Use the background property instead of the background image property. This would have no effect on the page. However, unlike the background image property, the background property may be used to set many other properties related to the background, and may do so in a single line of code. Set the URL back to bglandscape.jpg. On the next line, set the background size to 90%. So the image will resize to have a width that is 10% less than the width of the body. The other properties will be listed along with the URL for the background property. After the URL, add no repeat to set the background repeat. Add center and top to set the background position. Add fixed to set the background attachment. And add the hex color code to set the background color. Remove the redundant properties, then save and refresh the page. The new styles should now be applied with the image stretched to 90% of the width of the body and positioned at the top center of the window. The background property may be applied to elements other than the body as well. Let's create a quick image gallery without using IMG elements. Remove the main element from the HTML code and remove all the CSS from between the style tags. Add a div with an ID of gi_1 and a class of gallery image. Copy and paste this line a few times and change the ID of the new divs to gi2, gi3, and gi4. Now you can use the class name for any style you want applied to the div elements of the gallery, and the unique IDs to specify styles for specific gallery images. Add a style for the gallery image class. Set the float property to left. This is an alternate method for displaying elements horizontally that does not require setting the display to inline block. Set the width to 300 px and the height to 200 px. Add a margin of 5 px. As a temporary measure until the images are added, set the background color property to silver. Save and refresh the page to make sure the gallery is set up correctly. Notice as the window is resized, the divs do not change in size. In this example, the images are sized with px units, so the page is not responsive. Back to the code, create a style for the gi_1 div. Use the background property to set the background image to URL bglandscape.jpg. Also, set the background size to 300 px so the width of the background image will match the width of the div it is being applied to. When you save and refresh the page, the image looks pretty good. However, not all of the images will have the same width and height ratio of 300 by 200. Change the height of the gallery image divs to 100 px. Save and refresh. You see the image is now cut off. Change the height of the gallery image divs to 300 px. Save and refresh. The image is now repeating to fill the div. One solution is to set a value for the width and height of the background size to match the width and height of the div. Following the 300 px of the background size that is specifying the width of the image, add another 300 px to specify the height of the image. Save and refresh. So this approach works if you do not mind your images being stretched. If you want to use an image to fill a div that has a different aspect ratio, the only other option is to cut off part of the image. This time, let's cut off from the sides instead of the bottom. Set the background size to auto 300 px. The second value is used to set the height to 300 px, the same height as the div. The value of auto sets the width to the appropriate value based on the height to ensure the aspect ratio is maintained. You can see that this causes the image to stretch vertically to match the height of the div, but the right side of the image is cut off. After the URL, add center to horizontally position the image to the center of the div so an equal amount of the image is cut off from both sides. Let's set the height of the div back to 200 px, but leave the height of the image at 300 px. And add center again to vertically position the image to the center of the div. Save and refresh. Hopefully, you get the idea that you can manipulate the background of any element using all these properties to achieve any desired look. You could also create thumbnails of the images in a photo editor that all have the correct size beforehand. The question you should be asking yourself is, why would you ever want to use a div with the background image property instead of just using IMG elements? Thinking back to earlier in the lesson, the answer to this should be clear. If you want any content over an image, the background image property is a great option. In the first gallery image div, add the text "Title goes here." In the CSS for the gallery image divs, set the font size to 1.6 EM and the text align property to center. Save and refresh, and now you have text on top of an image. It is a bit difficult to read though. Let's make one last change to the code. Set the color of the text to transparent. Then create a style for the gallery image hover effect and set the color of the text to white. To make the text pop a bit more, also set the font weight to bold and the text shadow property to 2px black. Now when the page loads, the text is not visible until the image is hovered over. Using a div element with a background image instead of an IMG element allows for another hover effect that you could try on your own. Imagine if you had a black and white version and a color version of all the images in your gallery. You could have the black and white versions show until the image is hovered over, and at that moment the image could change to the color version. Once you created two versions of each image, this would only take a few lines of code. If you did use a separate image for the hover effect, you could add the text to the hover image directly using your favorite photo editing software. For now, my friends, that is all I have to say about the CSS background properties.